This year it's going to be
Okay, it's 7 straight up, and we may have a few stragglers, but Allison, I want your help in calling this meeting to order. My gentlemen, if we could stop the site conversations and give this your full attention, I really hope we can get out of here. I'm bad about keeping everyone late. Folks, I really love having you here, but everyone's got to maintain quiet while we do our work. Gentlemen, please. So first order of business, I just wanted a quick update from those of you who put additional information on the team site. You updated your FAS recommendations?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Was anything else posted to the site between now and our last meeting?
I put the agenda.
Okay, well, fine, great, thank you.
Yeah, I put up graphs.
Okay,
Seasonal graphs. There's, I'm trying to get on right now. There was a rest and rotation, white paper.
Yeah, you
great.
overcoming bias,
Overcoming
rest and
bias.
rotation.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
That was a discussion primarily towards all the fish, wildlife, and parks works. Remember from the NRC meetings, the first two meetings were going over wildlife and parks reports, and they were biased outfitters. So in that paper, we discussed bias.
Okay, well, let's launch in. And Dave Cumline sent me his recommendations on the FAS sites, and I'll get those posted tomorrow. Yes, Don.
I also put, this was Dan's request last time, monthly totals of angler pressure by residency status and section of the river for 2017, 19. Files.
And then I'd say to all of you, it's not really relevant for tonight's meeting, but I think it's going to be relevant for our next two meetings. Andrew Pulse has provided some really meaningful information to us since the last meeting. Now, I haven't connected with Becky to understand how much of that was composed. So we'll get that up as soon as possible. I may just send around an email to all of you. Really interesting data. 20 outfitter lunches.
The outsider information can all be available publicly. The only thing we can't post is anything that's considered sensitive information. So as long as there's no social security numbers, date of birth, things like that. So it should already be up. It's not.
It's not, no, it's been, I've emailed all of those files that I have, but they have not been posted to the
Okay.
team's website yet. As Brian sent me an email a little bit earlier today asking for.
Okay, then they can go up. So can you
Okay.
work with Kim to get those out?
She's had them for a week and a half, so I
I
don't
can
know
do
what the
that.
hold up is.
I'll follow up.
Yeah, why don't you just let it know that they can go up?
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for the update. The only other comment I had, I really appreciate the public being here tonight. I also wanted to welcome Commissioner Byard for those of you. Next thing is to ask Dan Larson to give us an update on the voting rules for this group. And we asked Dan in the last meeting to come up with some language to help clarify how we're
I
governed.
sent this to you last
You
week.
did,
Okay.
thanks, yeah. You just
What I tried to capture was the discussion that we had regarding basically a 75%, 9 out of 12 voting members. So this is what I drafted and shared with you last week. Resolved that all actions and recommendations of the Madison River Task Force shall require the affirmative vote of at least 9 of the 12 voting members. Members must be present in person or via virtual meeting connections, for example, Zoom or equivalent, in order to vote. There will be no voting by proxy. Members of the task force who disagree with an action or recommendation of the task force are free to offer a constructive alternative that seeks to address the issues and submit a minority report on such alternative.
I thought the minority report was.
I hadn't heard it that way. And if somebody doesn't vote for something, do they have to submit a minority report or just that they could? That's my understanding of.
Leave it as an option.
Yeah, and it's, if you feel strongly about something, you can weigh in. That's what I try to capture.
I like it. I think it touches the key elements. I think it sets the bar. And I like the idea that a minority opinion would be allowed to be brought forward to the commission in their ultimate deliberation. I think that works well for me.
Any other comments? Yeah, I feel like we voted on this and clarify like this from Dan.
Put it into the minutes or whatever.
Yeah, and let's post it on Teams. The concern I have tonight is we've got a few folks. We've got 9 in physical attendance, 1 on the phone. And so we're down 2 people, and I don't really know. We don't have a rule for that. This group was voted on by the commission, so first time I can deal with that with folks that are consistent no-shows will be at our next commission meeting. But I will take it upon myself to call these individuals and make sure they want to serve and find out what they want to do.
When we applied this model to the Legislative Sportsman's Caucus Advisory Council, we applied it as a percentage of the voting members. So you weren't able to hamstring the vote by not showing up. You know, because, you know.
I think we all agreed that the last meeting there would be 9 meetings, 9 people would be the super majority. Welcome, Chris.
Derail a meeting, derail a vote by just not showing up.
Let's not change what we voted on tonight. Let's let me do my job and see what, what's going on with Zach and yes, Chris. Who else are we missing tonight?
Good. Just Zach, Chris McGrath is.
Right.
Yep.
Chris McGrath. Okay, good, excellent.
So we have.
Okay, that's great. We'll find out what Zach's story is. The next big item for tonight is under the ARM rule. We really need to develop a recommendation for the commission on walkway and the rest rotation part of the rule that was passed by the former commission. And, I would say personally, these are the parts of this rule that received more feedback from constituents on any kind of person. One of the people who we agreed to have present tonight is Zach. You're here. So, I just asked you to make it brief, but
okay,
I look forward to hear your remarks.
this is good spot to be,
Wherever you'd like.
as long as they can see you.
As long as they can see on the television.
We can't see him. If he can move over by Commissioner, that would be great.
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission for giving me this time. A little background, Hugh Sackheim. I'm retired from 25-year career in land conservation, doing conservation projects the last 11 years with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. In fact, in their lands unit, retired about 5 years ago from them. And through that experience, both in the private sector, non-profits, and the Fish, Wildlife and Parks, that work in the Madison Valley in a number of conservation projects, conservation easements, as well as land acquisitions. And have a strong personal interest and former professional interest in this landscape. Going to go through sort of as if it's a very quick PowerPoint, no visuals. Brief history, it's 2 sentences, so don't get too wrapped up. The Reynolds to Lyons section, the upper Walkways section, has been off limits to fishing from a boat since 1988 and possibly as early as 1967. FWP didn't have that data, but there's been no fishing from a boat in that section. Now we're talking about 9 miles of the upper river for at least 33 years and perhaps more than 50 years. And there weren't a ton of people fishing from boats more than 50 years ago. So that section, and during that time, anglers from Montana and across the country have established, really what's become a generations-long tradition, wade fishing in this challenging water, and enjoying that exceptional landscape, and knowing that their efforts to get to some water aren't going to be interfered with by boat travelers. Where we are now, in November 2020, the Fish and Wildlife Commission adopted a rule allowing anglers to fish from boats in the Walkways section between Reynolds Bridge and Lionsbridge. The new rule is slated to go into effect in 2022, and it would allow that float fishing on approximately 30 days during high summer, middle June through the end of September. Half of those days, outfitters could fish with their clients from boats, and the other half, and those other days, 30 days, the public could float and fish from a boat. Right now, if I didn't say it, yeah, nobody's been able to fish from a boat. The rest of the year, that would remain closed to fishing from a boat. So you're looking at 30 days, of which 15 would be outfitter days. Guided anglers would be able to fish on Sundays, and non-guided anglers could float and fish on both Saturdays and Sundays. The new rule represents a major change that's going to seriously compromise the quality of the recreational experience that literally thousands of people have come to enjoy over the years. I mentioned I worked in land conservation around late 1990s and through 2001. I worked on the $3 bridge project where anglers, outfitters, guides, businesses, nonprofits donated so that landscape centered on $3 bridge, 3 miles of frontage, is now in public ownership. We all own it. It's Fish, Wildlife, and Parks property. Some of the best 3 miles of the Madison are now available for public fishing, and that's because people stepped up. Private people step up. The state stepped up, and it was a great effort, and it's by people that were really dedicated to that water. As part of the rulemaking process, FWP agreed to survey river users on key management issues. But after reviewing the FWP survey content, it became clear that this year's survey would not provide insight on a key question that I believe policy makers need to know before the 2022 fishing season when those changes come into effect. And that question specifically is how do anglers feel about opening up the Reynolds to Lyons section to fishing from a boat. So to address that, I developed a direct questionnaire to provide an opportunity for the people actually fishing that water to give their input. I enlisted a few volunteers to help distribute the questionnaire, and armed with our clipboards, we visited with the men and women who are out there at Reynolds Pass Bridge, at $3 Bridge, along the pullouts from West Fork up in this section. And so far, we've interviewed on-site, got questionnaires back from 300 people so far. And we did find a huge level of interest in this issue. Almost every angler that we met, they're all Montana fishing license holders, was highly motivated to have their input on this questionnaire. So what did we find? I think if I can do this, maybe to distribute. Got 2 items here. One is the questionnaire itself, the green sheet, and then the results are on the white paper.
This summer?
Yes, actually, yeah, just I mean, even last week, I think we didn't start until August, I think.
Okay.
And so it's really,
None last year. All this.
that's correct. It's all this year, August and September. I can't remember if we got any up in July. We did interview people there. We didn't leave them anywhere. We didn't tell people to, look online. We talked to people who were out there. So as I mentioned, we did 305 interviews. And the key finding is right on top there in bold. 99% of the respondents, 301 out of 305 answered no to the question, should anglers be allowed to fish from a boat on the Madison River from Reynolds Bridge to Lionsbridge? 81% said they didn't know about the proposed rule before it was adopted last November. On a different issue, 58% opposed the current regulation that allows the use of boats for access to wade fishing, while 42% supported this current regulation. I'll get back to that a little bit later. I mentioned the tradition. It's a real thing. 96 of the respondents, that is this summer, the last 2 months, 32% have fished this section of the Madison for more than 20 years, including 25 out of these individuals have fished it for more than 40 years, and eight anglers have fished that between 50 and 60 years. These are just the 300 people that we ran into, and there are literally thousands of people that fish that water. So the fact that we have those high numbers of people with that kind of site dedication, I think it's impressive. And 72 of the anglers, 72 out of the 300, so about a quarter, have fished here more than 100 times in their lives. Of the respondents, 19% are Montana residents, 81% of the folks that we talked to are from 31 other states. I'm sure every state's represented in the Walkways section. A few selected quotes, people had opportunity, and quite a few of them did. Gentleman from Florida, this is a special place, and you need to keep it a special place. Further down, a gentleman from New York, there needs to be a section protected for wading anglers where they needn't worry about constant boat traffic. This wade-only section is a highlight when I visit the Madison. Another gentleman said, the reason I come here year to year to wade, it is to wade fish this section. And then finally, a gentleman from Montana, $3 Bridge and the surrounding waters have been special to me as an angler for over 25 years. This is a place where any angler of any background, socioeconomic factor, or ability can have access to world-class fishing opportunities and camaraderie. It's a place where people of shared interests can come together. Discussions break out in parking areas and friendships are made. I'm a boat owner, but believe some places must remain sacred. I know that boat traffic interrupts the solitude of waiting and negates the effort of those who choose to hike in. The conclusions that I draw, there's overwhelming opposition among the people who fish Reynolds to Lions to allow fishing from a boat. You don't get 99% in too many surveys these days. People are exceptionally pleased with the opportunity that Walkway provides, and they do not see any reason to change the current regulations. Another conclusion, this is an incredibly loyal and dedicated clientele based on the years and numbers of time the individuals have fished there. The Walkway section of Madison is a magnet for these anglers. And one that opened my eyes, the respondents independently considered each issue with a fairly evenly split among responses regarding use of boats for access, which is allowed, no proposals to change that, contrasting sharply with the almost unanimous opposition to allowing fishing from a boat in the Lions to Reynolds section. Go over quickly a number of concerns with the change, and whether or not you agree with all these concerns, I think the balance of considerations should give reason enough to act now to reverse that rule as soon as possible. My request. Primary concern is that we're facing the loss of a nationally renowned walkway experience on this part of the Madison. Even 30 days a year, the outfitters only get 15, would only get 15. It's a big problem for people who come from all over the country to fish on foot in this section, expect there wouldn't be boats there. The other point is if Reynolds Lions becomes a pressure relief outlet for crowding on the rest of the river, which it certainly could, there'll be a push to put more boat days on here. I think once that starts, it's going to be really hard to reverse it and recover that quality. The key then is the inevitable conflicts, and we're going to have a lot of conflicts between people who are used to waiting that for their whole lives and seeing boats in there, I'm not sure how pleasant it's going to be for the boat anglers. The hydrology of that section, there's some pinch points. I was talking to a guy who's been guiding both on foot and taking anglers down in a boat to stop and wade fish for 35 years. He said there's some real pinch points. There's going to be some real issues there. Challenge to think of even one single action that would engender more potential conflict among river users than opening Reynolds to line the float fish. I think the amount of boat traffic there is going to be a lot more than people realize. All the parts of the process here are effectively dealing with the numbers, the problem of numbers of boats and how to get a handle on that and how to work effectively with both private and commercial parties. If you open, if Reynolds to Lions is open, we're going to see a massive influx of boats there. And particularly during salmon fight hatch and other times where you've got that water. It's also the closest water on the Madison to float from Big Sky, from Henry's Fork, from Ashton, and West Yellowstone as well. One of the guides mentioned he thinks the trout will be highly vulnerable. We talked about biology. Definitely hard to get a handle on those issues, but those trout haven't seen the kinds of presentations that come from float anglers, whether it's bobbers and nymphs and those kinds of things in some of those deep runs that wading anglers are struggling to get, where they can cast a fly. And the trout do have a refuge. A number of people commented on that. So we could perhaps lose that character of that water. And the rule that allowed float fishing did come at the last minute of a difficult process that you guys did had a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in. And as I said, 80% of the people that we talked to were not aware of that rule before it was adopted. And the one thing that works for the wade fishing for Reynolds Alliance is the ownership patterns. There's 4 bridges, 3 fishing access sites. There's BLM and Forest Service ownership, highway parking, and dirt road parking. If you look at that section, 9 miles of river, 18 miles of 2 shorelines, about 15 of those miles are accessible. That includes 4 miles of Forest Service, a mile of BLM, 1 mile landowner allowance, add a half-mile walking, that gives you another 1.5 miles, so that's going to take a little effort. 3 miles of highway pull-offs, 3 miles of FWP ownership, 1.5 miles of FWP easement, and 1 state section if you can use the boat to float to it. I know that's a key issue, and as I say, our results were mixed on that. That serves a purpose. It gets people to parts of the river who aren't going to be able to walk that half mile. But I just wanted to make the point that some people have said it's a really hard section to access. We can go over the map, and there's a lot of good access to that section, so it really does fit itself well as a walkway section. And then, as I mentioned, the heart of the section, the $3 bridge section that the public stood up for and demonstrated both by giving their dollars 20 years ago and spending their time effort to come to Montana, once who are out of state, once who are in state, to go up to the upper Madison and wade fish that great section of the river. With that, I would thank you for your indulgence, and that's my case, and I hope the work group will be able to take this up and reach the equities and the balances that you guys are charged with each and a number of issues.
Well, look, thank you for your efforts and for the survey work and for driving down here for the last 2 meetings. Really appreciate it.
Before you go, can I ask a question? Because I can't remember what that financial effort was, what it entailed in the $3 bridge area.
So, before I forget, I'll give a real shout out to one of the landowners up there, Elk Meadows Ranch. Candlestick Ranch was for sale, and I heard about it probably in mid to late 90s. The funds that we had to raise, at that point I was working for River Network, and it was about $500,000. And the reason it wasn't $5 million because the ranch went way up in the uphills, up in the foothills along the Reynolds Pass Highway, was that a private rancher bought that, Oak Meadows bought that for the conservation easement on it, open range land. So we were able to focus on the river. About $500,000 was was the financial nut that we had to crack, and as I said, we got contributions from a lot of folks and
But the
organizations.
purpose of it was to create a conservation.
No, the purpose of we were able to focus on buying the riverfront and transferring it over to FWP. So River Network got the tiger by the tail, and I think Fish Wildlife and Parks paid 300,000 or 250 to us. We just needed what we needed to get the whole their deal.
Thank you for that. I've only been there for 40 plus years. You think I know that, but I can.
I think it turned out to be a pretty good bargain for that. But as I say, we're really helped by private landowners who, and particularly Madison stuff.
Yeah, so just Hugh, just a quick question on the survey. I mean, this is the sample design guy. I mean, if you're sampling an area that's already under a current regulation and you discover that 99% of the people like that regulation, how do you account for the anglers that would be allowed in there in 2020?
So that's, yes, you don't. That's the goal that I set, was to have the people that I felt were left out of the process because of the crunch time that came up with the work with the, negotiated rulemaking. And yeah, so just really wanted to find out and give those people a chance to say why, if it's something that they liked, and did they really like it? Well, they really liked it. So, yeah.
So the public process we all went through leading up to November of 2020, it started on April of 2018. People weren't involved in it.
I would guess not. I guess your point's well taken. It's not a fault of the negotiated rulemaking process. I would say this, Mike, that because I was involved in some of the summer, I was looking in June and then November, and it was certainly quite a surprise to me that all of a sudden was being voted on to open walkway for boats. I know there were reasons that came out, but anyway, yeah.
So
Yeah.
the discussions we had to the NRC in this very room that opened that. Yes.
Could have been, yeah, and I could have missed it too, but
My other question is, if this is leaving off of that. Again, so you didn't sample anybody from Lion.
no.
So you didn't talk to any boat anglers?
There were, remember we helped some boat anglers put their boats in. There were some that were using it there. Yeah, no, we didn't go out and seek people that were downstream from
Are
Lions.
these people aware that can wade anywhere on Madison? The entire Madison is open to wade fishing.
I believe there are. We had enough responses that people said, we've liked it here for 30 years, 50 years, 60 years. It works well, and it gives us that diversity that FWP said in the process, the diversity of recreational experiences, and that's why many of these people come back. So I have no doubt that people who could fish in boats there would do that.
Quick question, I believe you said 58% was for keeping it status quo the way the reg is right now. Or excuse me, 58% against 42% keeping it the way it was. And I would assume that's people putting their 2 cents in a right along angling method, and 42% were people in boats that were hopping from spot to spot, and 58% were anglers, walkway anglers. Is that about right? Which would suggest that
I would say that most of the people that we interviewed, there were very few that we didn't talk to that had boats or watercraft. So you had a lot of people that were wade fishing, and they said, no, it's fine to use boats to access this section. We realize it has some challenges. We don't particularly want to walk down the Big Bend, and we don't think we're going to get there anyway. So, and others, Richard talked to me about this too, in terms of, some people might say, well, boats, but it wasn't an anti-boat crowd, but it was a pro $3 bridge section, Reynolds to Lions section for walking. And the majority said they didn't even want to see boats used for access, but that goes to the study design, issues that Mike and Mac are raising, that these are the people out there
Is there a
walking.
reason why you weren't surveying the people that were in the boats hopping from spot to spot? And getting
We didn't
out?
see any. We would have surveyed them. We just had a handful of volunteers.
So it's very light
Yeah.
traffic.
And it was a crazy year too, with smoke and the heat and stuff, so there were fewer people than I've
That's my
seen there.
question.
We don't have data on the non-guided anglers that use boats. We do on guided, to your point, if there's not very many. On average, you pick any month of the year, there's less than 3 guided boats on average. So there's more unguided people that use boats, but relative to the number of people that use that section, it's currently overwhelmingly.
So fair enough.
Thank you.
Thank you, thanks.
Well
Yeah,
done.
Thanks.
so let's open it up to discussion. Obviously, I don't know the real history of the NRC, but my understanding is there was really a trade-off between this rule and the rest rotation. And I know many of you in the room have been talking to folks in the community, and I'm super interested with. Who wants to kick off?
Well, I've been involved in this issue for a long time. And I'm also one of the people that tried to go from $3 to Big Bend, and you can't wait. I did it with a friend of mine, it's just impossible to do. So if the boat ban is gone now. And that was proposed 3-to-1 in the public comment when the rule was discussed, as well as 3-to-1 against restaurant rotation. And somehow we ended up with, and there was also a sizable group in there that didn't want float fishing. When you put all those things together, it says the current rule works, and it's worked for 30 years. And that's, I think what you need to have the boat to access the Big Bend, which is a good section to fish. And when this first came up, there were some fairly loud landowners down there. They were trying to keep that section for themselves, along with the 120 acres of public land that's there. But I think we got a situation right now that works. People are happy with it. It maintains access. And it prevent, and it keeps the people that want to wade fish, their little spot.
Mike,
Richard, you mentioned the boat ban, and I think there's a fair number of people here who probably don't even recognize what that was, but there was a proposal to ban all boats from Lake to the line, what it was. It's 3-to-1 against that.
is that part of the NRC process?
It was within the NRC process. Prior to that. and through it.
So the
And that was in also, it was in 2019 petitions, it was in Madison River Foundation petition, and also the George Green.
Yeah, well, let's contain this other group, and then we'll take public comment. Yeah.
One way, possibly, is anybody here in the working group pro rest and rotation? And if you are, would you mind telling us your opinions and why? I think the predominant move on the working group seems to be opposed to rest and rotation, but we certainly would like to hear public argument for it.
I can speak a little bit to I guess, what was viewed as a compromise. I would say probably with 100% certainty, you won't find any guides or outfitters that think rest rotation is a good idea. There's certainly some unguided anglers that here, obviously, that's why people work. Through the process, the not to accept rest rotation was in this zone, was it at a minimum maintained the existing mileage of float fishing water. It wasn't something that anybody was violating, at least those impacted, right? The guided anglers, or the guides that operate boats, definitely were not in favor of it. if it was gonna be, quote, shoved down our throats, this alternative at least minimize it to only 15 days or whatever the days year. And it was offset by some water. If you couldn't fish down here, you had another zone to fish. That was sort of part of the conversation. But I don't remember anybody, excited.
No, so the history of it was in 2020, there were 2 petitions. One from Workgroup. Petitioners from GGTU insisted or pushed strongly to have western rotation as a method adopted for managing commercial use. And phone was opposed to that. Because from Lionsbridge to FAS, 39 miles. Were to take 1/3, the proposal was Lions to Palisades, which is 8 miles there. Through some western rotation schedule, said, well, if you're going to take 8 miles off of 39 miles, apparently crowded use, we would look for a pressure release valve. That's where it came from, to open up the walkway section to float fishing and compromise. That was the compromise. Okay, we opened lines to Reynolds to Lions to float fishing for those that time period of essentially peak use to provide that safety relief valve, pressure relief valve for float outfitters and public to float another 7 mile at the time. So we're giving up 9 miles lines to Palisades, and we were gaining 7 miles Reynolds. The idea was, if you're gonna insist on western rotation, we would need, you don't want to lose 30, 20% of a mile available flow. So that's how food section, the only place to do it is.
I wasn't a formal part of the NRC process, but I sat in on most of the process and followed that, the preceding processes and hearings, various things. So I've got fair history there. My sense was that there were, as we heard, compromises and some last minute shuffling that came up with the walkway issue on the upper section of allowing boats into there, the rest in rotation, commercial caps there. One of the questions I have is, because of the interrelatedness of how these issues have been discussed, balanced, trying to come up with workable solutions for different interests. As we're sitting here today talking about a recommendation to the commission for 2022, do we need to, are we best served by just saying maybe both the western rotation and the upper boats allowed into the walkway area should be deferred to 2023 or such, and subject to what recommendations come out of this group as we look at the whole issues of how to work out caps, how to do the rest of the road, whether there's rest of rotation at all. I don't think there's any interest. I think rest of rotation has potential unintended consequences. Seen it in some of your diagrams that you sent around. But there, we saw it even with the food owl restrictions of well-intended ends up with chaos. So I'm at least wondering whether we need to make a definitive yes or no, or are we sort of looking at a time?
Oh, we can do either, we can do either. What I guess what I'm looking for from this group is there a strong enough opinion that these are bad ideas that we should go to the commission recommendation that we take off the table.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. And Dan, I think this has been good discussion. These are inextricably linked because they were triggered from an action. And that action was the pushing of arrest and rotation concept. We wouldn't have been talking about the walk and wait issues if it hadn't been for that. And there is, I think, compelling evidence and information put on our website, put on our stuff, in public opinion, in public comment. I mean, when I look at it, we wrote a position paper on it, 7/24/19, position on those restrictions on arrest and rotation, how it didn't apply, that was submitted to the commission. Foam followed it, 11 sometime, probably around the middle of the month, and 20 wrote a very good paper on it. There's synopsis of public comment. 78% of people opposed it with arrest and rotation. I think the visual walk and wait information that Andrew Brian put up recently makes a very compelling argument that this is a bad idea. And if it's a bad idea, so's the other one. Because we've got this Hugh Zackheim talking to us about 30 years of performance. We've got folks who've done a tremendous amount of work in evaluating these things. So basically, it's my thinking, both of these are a bad idea. It should just be taken off the table, clear the slate, and let's press on with the other issues. That's how I feel about it.
And to address your question, that's exactly the question I brought up last week or 2 weeks ago when we discussed this tonight. And our concern is that, you know, so far arrest and rotation hasn't gone away. And my concern through this, or our concern through this was, yeah, we'll agree, let's drop these rules tonight, and then the 11th hour will be end to make recommendations. Someone said, oh yeah, let's have recommendations. I rather not see that. We would rather not see that. Out for the action. Not see that. So I think we'll discuss acts and acts one without the other action.
I would have one, so, you know, there's two trains of thought. There's not a lot of support for either idea. And I think Dan's comment is, if it is going to be adopted, it should be adopted in the framework of lots of thought. You know, we've got quite a bit of time to think about maybe the most important group in the state. So, you know, shelve this until we discuss it in context with a lot of other important issues. And the other is throw it out now, it can come back in later if it's part of that fabric. And I can go either way with those 2 points. I would add, although we're here to discuss the Madison in particular, we have rapid population growth across Montana. The same patterns we're seeing in the Madison are happening on other rivers and marquee rivers. We will likely need recreation plans on other rivers, and arrest rotation is so highly contentious. It will be an obstacle on other rivers as well if it's used as a management program. My hope is the recreation plan that comes out of Madison, the mechanics of it are something that can apply to the Yellowstone River, to the Black River, to the Blackfoot River. That's just one of the factors.
I think one of the other big problems with arrest and rotation which is basically a group of people saying, I don't hire guides, it's crowded. If I can get the people that hire guides off my section of the river, then things will be good. We're gonna have to, on the agenda is discussing the non-commercial cap. So if we don't do that fairly, and rest notation doesn't do it fairly, then we're gonna be in a big problem. So I think it's just a bad precedent to let this rest notation sit here. I think we should just get rid of it tonight. Put the float fishing in the wake section to bed. Move forward.
Understanding, I guess my perspective is, I would then take that recommendation to the commission. It'll be on the commission agenda. And if there are people who feel very strongly about rest and rotation and opening up this section of boats, their time to speak will be at the commission.
I don't see the value of kicking the can down the road with pretty strong consensus here, the working group, that we feel that the concept of rest and rotation is a bad idea. I don't think we need something we need to give a couple of year try. I think that'd be a huge mistake. So I make a motion to strike rest and rotation from Madison rules and regulations and 50%.
Second. Don't you want to combine that also with the?
Sure, let's combine it all with keeping status quo, the walkways section from Reynolds down to Lions with not allowing fishing from inside the boat, but to continue to allow people to launch boats, whether commercial or non-commercial, to use the watercraft to go down, anchor up on the sides of the rivers, get out and fish from outside of the boat, the way that the regulation is right now. And not only from Reynolds, but down to Lions, but also from Ennis down to Ennis Lake. All the same as now.
Second.
And we'll modify the language slightly to cite the two rules. Okay, so now I know Commissioner Byer had a comment.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of misconceptions are floating around about how this was ramrodded through, and I just want to clarify that the NRC, the negotiated rulemaking, was formed after a rule was proposed and failed. The negotiating rulemaking committee attempted to develop a rule and did not get there. There was two petitions from two parties, petition for rulemaking, brought before the commission that were heard, public comment was taken, and those petitions were turned down. Then a large scale survey was done. And then the commission, from the large scale survey, that I think drew almost 10,000 comments. So 10,000 people commented on this, included Walkway, included rest rotation, and they were not unanimous or clear, no matter what, you're completely correct. And then the commission did its best based on information on recreational use, on commercial use, to develop a proposal. And part of that proposal was to create a work group to deal with these sticky issues. So this idea that somehow it got routed through the 11th hour is simply untrue. It's not a matter of record. And this work group is very specifically charged with addressing that. So I'd suggest that it's pretty clear it's unanimous among you, which helps our recommendation to the commission, or helps us receive a recommendation clearly. But I'd suggest that you should deliberate something on what else do you got in your quiver. That's really what the commission wanted, was let's get it out to a bunch of people to think this through and come up with some other solutions. So it wasn't just, Walkway, slam bam, 10 minutes, you're done. You gotta, do me a favor as a commissioner, and you're in this region, on the Madison River, to offer some other creative solutions rather than just, get rid of that one. I mean, obviously it was handed to you because it wasn't clear to the commission, but let's do some creative thinking. You don't have to do it tonight, but at some point, you got to come up with other ideas. The other question, and I'm not sure about this, but I thought the commission has already ruled to move this to 2023.
That's just the cap.
Yeah, walkway and rest rotation goes into effect in 2022 according to the current rule.
Oh, thank you, Claire. So anyway, just, take the time that you need to come up with it. And please,
Pat, I
offer us
think the
alternative.
creative thinking is coming, and I think ramrodding is the wrong terminology. It suggests behind the scenes negative feelings that were going on. Certainly, you guys did a lot of hard work, and stretch, we're not trying to take away from that, and appreciate everything we've done. It certainly set all the groundwork for us to be here tonight, try to make some good stuff going forward. I just think this particular rest of the rotation and fishing from inside the boat are things that sort of unanimously, it seems like it's a bad idea, but that doesn't mean that some progressive, thoughtful, not only cap, other regulations, types of different things that come. Already.
I'd echo that if I could, and then I think Commissioner Butart by taking, and all we're doing is recommending, right? But if that's taken off the landscape in December, then the confidence will rise to be able to press forward on those creative decisions, not thinking it's gonna come out of that field and bite you later. So that would be that's my interest in voting to recommend it be eliminated from that rule, not just delay another couple of years. So, but I do think we're committed to the creative thing. I hope we are. I hope we get it done. I really do.
Just for the record, can I make sure I got this right? So what you voted on is to remove, what you are gonna vote on, sorry.
Correct.
What you are gonna vote on is to remove 12.11.6702,
Correct.
which is the walkway section, and 12.11.6706, which is the vegetation section.
Correct.
So to remove those, and then to keep the status quo as it is in the 2021 rules book. That's where your motion was?
Yes,
Get that right?
that's right.
Is everyone familiar with what's in the rules book, or do you want me to go over that? So you know what you're voting on, you all comfortable?
The existing rules for the walkway section.
Yeah, so it'll be the existing regulations as they are in the rules.
Right.
The two rules that I mentioned would go away, and then you'd be left with what's in here unless you choose something else.
Well, and that's what I was just gonna say. I think we may have some discussion about some other ideas
Yes.
supplemental to the walkway and.
Eileen, excuse me, as a formality, paraphrase in just a few sentences, the regulation as.
What it currently is
Yes,
as it
please,
relates
thank
to the fishing from a
Yes,
boat.
please.
Okay, so, Quake Lake to Lions, close to fishing from boats/vessels. Ennis Bridge to Ennis Lake, close to fishing from boats/vessels. That's what's currently in place.
Great.
So if you remove those two rules for anything related to fishing from a boat, that's what would remain.
Can't fish from the boat, but you can launch the boat, and use the boat as a vehicle to get from point A to point B, and then remove yourself from the boat.
So just again, before you vote for process, how it would work is the commission would vote on a proposal for an administrative rule to go out for public comment. Then the administrative rule would go through the MAPA process. There would be public comment on it, then it would go back as a final rule to the commission. Just so as you're aware, it's a different process than regulation. So I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that process.
And we have enough time if we do vote on this, the commission confirm what this group recommends, that you'll be able to do it in time to catch the changes. Right.
The reg book goes to print January 2nd.
Okay.
The rule, that's why I mentioned the rule process and the regulation process are two different things. If regulations are finalized in October, yes, they'll get in the book. With the rules, we're subject to the Secretary of State schedule, so I can't guarantee that they would make it in the book, but that happens fairly frequently. What we would do is press release signage, so as the public are aware of what the rules are. if it's different than what's in the action book. That actually happens fairly often, so.
Are we still discussing?
Yes.
So there were several ideas when this process was going on. The final rule was Reynolds to Lionsbridge. There were other sections considered for vote, and one of them was Pine Butte to Lionsbridge, which is about 3 miles. We talked about Pine Butte last week. If we have to mess it going through it, I think that's 3 miles above Lions. One of the proposals previously discussed was voting open Pine Butte to Lions. Or for fishing. So it would be the 30 days.
No, I don't.
I would like to just make a general comment to address Commissioner Byron's concerns that and all the conversations they've had and haven't chatted with everybody in the work group. I think there's a general sense that there are significant concerns related to recreation on the Madison River, and we have a lot of heavy lifting to do. I think what's really important as a work group is that we take time to narrow and articulate the detail of the problem at hand. And then after we have done that, we can carefully craft mechanics that provide the best solutions. Solve this problem.
Okay. Any other comments? Call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So unanimous vote. What about Chris? Chris?
You're on mute.
Aye. Sorry, was on mute.
Aye or nay?
Aye.
Okay.
So that's pretty amazing. I don't know. Yeah. It's just-
It's only a step along the
That's a
way.
good step. I think it's,
It's gonna have some
there
process.
was a lot leading up to this stuff. The process.
Eileen, I accidentally included Ennis to Ennis Lake in my motion. That's not on the negotiated block. That
Yeah, that's what I want you
that's
to
that wasn't
clarify.
proposed. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, that's why I want to clarify to
Thank
make sure.
We're just gonna tackle it in these two rules.
The new rules didn't change the lower weight section.
It had been on the table at 120, but then came off. Everything was. Reached around, yeah.
So on to the next topic, and that is not really part of our direct charge, but in our discussion at our last meeting, one of the concerns for this group is what the increased fishing pressure it has been and will be on the fish in the Madison River. And we have an opportunity here to make recommendations. And again, these are just going to be recommendations to the commission on adjustments to the fishing regulations for the upper river or the lower river to go into effect in 2022 if the commission decides to support that. And my opinion is that this is similar to the big long beaverhead where we have challenges to fisheries. We recently, at our last meeting, the commission adopted moving to single hook artificial lures. And the only difference here would be I think that the whole upper section is restricted to artificial lure already, but it is open to fishing with treble hooks.
I could just throw out for discussion, this anticipation of this, I talked to a lot of interested parties. One of the things, one of the common themes was how do we protect and maintain the health of the fishery? Knowing that there's going to be increased pressure there, we're not going to immediately address that pressure. Solutions there. So the concept of barbless hooks, the park went to it several years ago. Potential of going barbless hooks, no treble hooks. Was quite strongly endorsed. On one hand, we're not necessarily a big fan of it. It's not real enforceable. It can be arbitrary. But on the other hand, it sends the right message of trying to protect the fish. Equally damaged.
What are we discussing here?
Potential changes to the fishing regulations.
Where?
Next year.
Okay. So beyond, just went through brown trout stuff. But there's
No, this is for the Madison.
beyond that.
Yeah.
Nothing really was adopted for Madison because of issues, but we don't have any proposed red changes right now.
I was just opening it up to this first part.
That's the discussion.
So there's looking for the paper. There's a vast amount of mortality studies, fishing studies, barbless, non-barbless. Big study that pretty much everybody goes to was a 20-year study done by Fish and Wildlife Service looking at fishing marks across. I have to find the paper. I have the paper. But there is, and I said this through the brown trout work groups, there is no, the idea of barbless hooks is 50-50. It depends on the size of the hook and the size of the bar, the size of it, which you use it. So that's why it's always been, it's barbless recommended, certainly barbless. Something like the salmon fry, you can get out, handle of times. But what they looked at treble hooks, they looked at mortality across most angling methods, and it's a single artificial lure hook is better than a treble hook, certainly. But the whole barbless barb thing is almost, there's no definitive answer to it. It's 50-50 on mortality.
But does it also send a social message of what you're trying to do? I'm asking.
You're still allowed to take fish in the upper. So catch a fish with barbless hook and put it on a string.
Fairly limited.
You're only 14 years old, right?
Yeah, one fish.
So
And I think that's something we have to discuss.
So this would be a great place to start. Maybe it's Joe Dill Schneider, maybe anybody in this room know absolutely every regulation as far as ways of harvesting fish if you can bait single. Is anybody complete a fish out of here on the regulations?
I'm fairly versed, but there may be someone with more information.
It's pretty strict.
Changes from, doesn't it change somewhere?
Do you want,
There's
you want
a
to-
barbless section now, Joe, or?
no,
do you want me to go over the
Yeah,
regulations as
please,
they
that'd
are?
be very helpful.
I'll just start at the top and work down if that'll be helpful. So park boundaries to Hefkin, catch and release for rainbow trout, except anglers 14 years of age or younger may take one trout daily in possession. So these are exceptions to the standards.
So it would be 5 fish, 5 brown trout.
So the brown trout standard is, combined trout is 5 daily.
And it's a section on Madison that allows. The whole section.
Once you get below Quake Lake, it's.
So-
all
Part to
right.
head where you stay right now.
Yeah, so that was the part to Hebgen. Quake Lake to Lions, the same catch and release except the age 14 years for rainbows.
And how many
we can
rainbows,
take
Eileen?
One.
One rainbow, thank you.
Oh, no, that's different. So that section is 1 trout,
Brown or rainbow.
trout combined.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the other one is different because there's the exception for, well, there's the standard with the exception for rainbows. So it gets a little confusing.
Got it.
Lines to Barney is the same, catch and release, 1 trout, 1 combined trout for the 14 and younger, and artificial lures only. So that's Quake Lake to Lions, then Lions to Barney, artificial lures only. Barney to Innis is the same, but 1 rainbow, not combined trout. So that goes back to you can have brown trout.
And how about bait fishing?
Artificial lures only from Quake Lake to Ennis Lake is artificial lures only.
Okay.
And it's down to the mouth, there's a northern pike exception, everything else is standard. Warm Springs day use only, there's no exceptions.
So the Varney downstream allows you to take 5 brown trout, right?
Right,
Yeah, okay.
and that's the same as the park boundary to Hebgen
And treble hooks are,
and Ennis Bridge to Ennis Lake. I have copies of the regs as well.
treble hooks are legal.
Yes, throughout.
There's no restrictions on the hook or the gear, with the exception of those sections that is artificial lures only.
And then once you go from Ennis Lake down, or from the dam, basically, then you're back to. just
Then you're back
normal
to the
regs.
standard.
So,
Fair track too.
exactly,
But it's artificial lures only
on the upper,
from Quake Lake all the way to Ennis.
from Tevkin all the way.
Hebgen all the way to
From-
Ennis.
No, it is artificial lures only from Quake Lake outlet to Ennis Lake.
All right.
Lakes.
From the park to Hebgen is in Jones.
And even that section between Tevkin and Lake.
Right.
Yeah.
There's room for discussion.
I don't know.
Is there a biological reason why the brown trout were left at 5? From, we had this discussion in our last meeting about trying to limit the impact.
Yeah, so all of the work from the brown trout study shows that the driving factor is flows. The reason we focused on the big hole in the beaver head is a combination of water conditions are so bad there. The additional reg change might make a difference, give the fish slightly less stress. And the reason the Madison wasn't taken up at the last commission was because there's already a lot going on in the Madison, and there isn't the biological backing for it at this time. So that was the discussion that was had in August. And, to remind everybody, that was scoped fairly extensively during the summer. We scoped all of the Southwest Montana waters in relation to brown trout population changes. And there was a focus group, and then that culminated in the recommendation that went to the commission August 20th.
I have a question on just the fish counts. In the most recent publications from Madison, is it accurate that the brown trout in the Pine Butte reach as well as the Norris Reach are like 20-year lows.
Is that,
That's correct.
I don't have that in front of me.
I was gonna oppose the statement in that working group or that focus group, the information, same data you're pulling. was presented. And FWP biologist Mike Duncan recommended adopted as a good idea for the Madison and that lower reach, especially being that beta test section comparatively from Warren Springs down to Black's Ford as a no change, but Warren Springs to Bear Trap being closed during fall spawn as one of those efforts to address the brown trout population decline in those regions. So, but yeah, the numbers, and we saw them again today in the Madison tactical meetings with Northwestern Energy, and they presented those similar numbers, 20 line, and Pine was one of those discussed in that discussion as to places where we do restoration projects and water mitigation and other things to try to help, as we know, flow and temperature are key factors to fish health. And so those points were brought up for a whole other separate reason, which was conservation and protection of those fish through projects and restoration. And that means Western Energy, FWP, and others. But those statistics and numbers were in fact the same there as they were in that meeting we had in review, discussing the scientific approach to monitor and find out how to affect positively the brown trout population. And that's why with Commissioner Walsh's permission, that's why I stood up and made those comments at the commission meeting, because going from that focus group and those conversations and the data sets and the information we had presented to us, there was an adoption by the group, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we were going to make similar actions on all these sheds with regards to the brown trout to be able to create scientific studies and gain more information if these practices actually work, whether it was barbless or artificial or no kill or catch and release or the spawning aspect. The spawning aspect that the group became kind of majority opinion. That was the number two thing we could do without affecting the water and temperature that the group agreed to implement throughout the different watersheds. From that point forward, whatever changed or happened in determining that, Madison was then pulled off that table. And so that's why I spoke out on behalf of the brown trout of the Madison River, I guess, but to find out how we can affect the positive change. And so in my opinion, opinion of the board of directors and the majority of the members we talked to, doing nothing is the wrong answer. So
That comment.
Yeah.
Nobody here, including me or Dr. Rice or John Scott, is qualified to make a recommendation on regulations until you hear from the biologist and you go through the data. And then every one of you will be on the same page and you'll understand what the limiting factors are. We have over 50 years of history of managing the Madison under different regulations at different times. And we have actual piles of data about harvest and about participation and effects of different styles of fishing. And so I'd ask you to invite Dr. Duncan down here so you can see the data and you can see it over in the context of where it's been and where it's going. Because in my experience, and I did manage the Madison River for 7 years, and I made regulations and recommendations to the commission. You're focusing a lot of energy on fishing regulations. You're probably not going to get much bang for your buck. I know it sounds good and it feels good, but to be honest with you, for the last 15 years, hooking mortality due to catch and release probably far exceeds any harvest. So in good terms of that, I mean, are you doing anything significant to affect the fish? And I don't know, because I haven't dug into the data that they have. I saw it today with John, but well, so think about that.
Commissioner, I just say that what this group is charged with doing is making recommendations related to unheralded pressure on this river, and that we don't have the biological background to do anything other than make a high-level recommendation and then turn it over to the process that will involve Dr. Rice and her team to really look at this and make the argument to the commission one way or the other. But I think there are things that stand out to me in these regs that just don't make sense. And one is, why would you treat rainbow trout differently than brown trout? And why would you let 14-year-old young kids take fish out of the river? I mean, we don't do that in other parts, other major rivers. And I think in our last meeting, we really set the charge for this group, and it's really the social experience on the river, but it's also fish health. And what does it mean to have this level of, how many days, angler days? You say 1 million?
263,000.
It's over 200,000, but if you look at catch rates, average about fish per hour. Fish for 4 hours, you catch about 1 million fish. Back
In the population is
if you estimate about 3,300 per mile times 54 miles of the upper river, you got about 180,000 trout.
so every trout is potentially being caught 5 times.
This is where the biology comes in.
That's it.
All right,
Casey,
Fine.
if, this is new on the agenda. Last
Well,
week,
we talked about it in the last meeting. We said this is the last window we make recommendations for the 2020 season.
those were handled through Fish, Wildlife and Parks.
No, but we said that this was going to be a discussion topic on things. Okay.
Well, for Walkways and restoration, we
Yeah.
have Zach and I come to that.
Right.
You're asking us to make decisions, biological decisions on it for each.
I think we're just
Well,
having
no,
a
we're just
discussion.
It's a
And
discussion.
I'd like to offer a perspective if I could here. And I've managed cold water recreational fisheries in Southwest Alaska for 15 years. I have probably as much experience managing rainbow trout. I don't have much on brown trout, but cold water, we were faced with a large increase in effort. And that increase in effort was met with the adoption of what we call the conservative wild stock management approach. And I think Southwest Montana, certainly this river, screams for a policy of conservative wild stock management that is measured on historical performance within the fishery. In other words, when people step into the arena and say, oh, the fishery's gone well, based on what? Based on what? Well, we have the beauty in Montana for just a tremendous amount of food. We've got fish per river mile, we have catch rate, we've got size and age, we've got a number of parameters that are things that are indicative of a healthy stock. What's a healthy stock? Meeting our historical norms. Okay, so it would be something that I think worthy of discussion, that a suite of policies be considered and applied to those fisheries like the Madison that are extraordinary, special management waters, if you will, and ones that we would apply a policy of conservative wild stock management. That means depressed stock conditions aren't to be mitigated by hatchery performance. That means single hook artificial lures, the entire reach. That means very limited harvest. And it goes partly to your comments on education. If that is treated as a special management water, perhaps one of many across the state, then we're sending a message that these waters and these fisheries are important. And then we manage toward things that get triggered for conservation is deviation from certain parameters that are already there. So for example, let's take the size of the catchable population. The average size of the fish caught will have a mean. You take an 80% confidence interval plus around the thing. Deviation from that for any significant period of time speaks to a problem. Abundance, the abundance information is staggering here. The work that the biologists and former biologists have done. And then those parameters trigger certain things. They trigger reaction because theoretically, we can only control certain things. We can't control water flow, we can't control temperature. But we can, in fact, do certain things. To the point on barbless hooks, we've had this discussion in the profession ad nauseum, and it's not worth it. We can significantly reduce mortality on multiple hooking events by going from bait to single hook to artificial. That's crystal clear. The issue of going from single hook artificial lure to barbless constitutes a very minor benefit, very minor. When Idaho did it, the research staff, and I was working intimately with them at the time, objected to it. They said it's not of consequence, it's emotion driven. Guess what happened the next year in Idaho? The largest number of tickets that were written in that state related to fisheries had to do with barbless hook regulations, a biologically meaningless regulation that disenfranchised the largest number of participants. So I think the body of science is strong to call for single hook artificial lures, special management, water type designation, but stopping short of going to barbless largely because of the enforcement aspects of barbless, isn't it? You know, how thin and hairy, how to use. But I would advocate for a team to discuss, and I would suggest that maybe you task a couple of people to develop a policy statement about conservative wild stock management that could be applied here. And what parameters would you be looking at to see deviation from historical norms? Because that's what triggers them. It's when we've lost fish for river line, or the size of the catchable population is shifted to the left, and it's not a product of larger improvement. You know, things like that are triggers, and generally speaking, a policy would say all users, you know, basically pay in the burden of conservation equivalent to your impact. So those that are harvesting would be the first ones to go, you know, and so on and so forth. But it's an issue of communicating a sound policy that takes us from what life was 20 years ago to what life is today, and sending a message about how Montana views its cold water wild trout fishery resources. And I think it's not complicated.
We're looking at the Madison River right now.
Correct.
This group, and I think that
We could write the template for it.
right.
I recommend that you get a good explanation of the existing data. In fact, I mean, the brown trout are below historic norms, but they're not outside the realm of the normal fluctuation. So at least get the information, is all I'm saying.
The information is not good, is what I've seen. I mean, and we just heard a totally conflicting point of view from John with the department. And, you know, brown trout are really at a 20-year low in this river. I mean,
Look at the data, so you know, because John and I looked at the same thing. I mean, at least get it in front of you and have the biologist who collects it, whose job it is to analyze it, explain what you're seeing.
okay, now let's just go back to public comment and we'll hold comments till the end. We really have our work to do
Could I
here.
chime in on one quick thing?
Yeah.
There's two ways of looking at this. We can look at this pool of data, there's three guys going down with archaic technology of throwing a huge. electric shock. I just like to continue, if I can say what I can say. The electroshocking, and those three guys can give us all of our data that we're in historic, critical level lows in brown trout in the Madison River. And we can respond to that, we can look at that, right? Or we can take a couple of 30,000 foot pictures here, like, do we all agree that treble hooks are harder on fish and have no place on the upper Madison Sacred River, and that we'd like to go to single hooks? That's a no-brainer in my, or catch and release. Why are we teaching young kids the joy of catching and killing a fish when really what we should be teaching young kids is the joy of catch and release, and how to hold the fish, how to put it back, and how to do it the right way? Instead, we're teaching it how to hit it over the head and go home and eat it. Oh, but by the way, next year when we're 15, we can't do that. So all I'm saying is there's two ways of looking at it. this board, we don't pretend like we're fisheries biologists. That would be unwise. I think it's completely smart that we bring in, you should have been here tonight. That would have been fantastic. Maybe the next week. We can get it. But I think what we're just doing is throwing around concepts that seem to common sense make sense.
I like what Matt said about how special, you know, in my mind, the Madison is the Mona Lisa. And my global. And I look at other places on the planet that have the same stature as Montana does in the wild trout universe. It's New Zealand, Alaska, Patagonia, Montana. And New Zealand, you know, you go to Alaska and it's all catch and release for rainbows. I do think I do agree that, you know, we should have single hook, we should have no bait, we should have catch and release. Some of that can't hurt the biology. Some of those, but it does also. You kind of mentioned that some of it's like social, right, and some of it's culture. And I'm fine harvesting fish. I take my kids to King Ferry and we catch walleye, and if we're backpacking, you know, we're frying up some brook trout. But we don't. But I teach my kids to release fish in the Madison. And I preach that this is special, it's unique, and we need to take care of it. And I think that's the culture that we have around the sport. And so by having those kind of regulations, it helps that culture, it helps that brand. Some of it's helping the fishery, but there's also the social part of it, and that's a big part of this too. It's not just the fishery. It's the, you know, you think of balls die when you lose your anchor streams. In Montana, we have a few anchor rivers: the Madison, Yellowstone, the Blackfoot, you know, Missouri. And at all costs, we have to not just fish them to capacity, but we have to protect them and make sure that they're really, really special places, because they anchor everything else. People don't come to Montana if those famous rivers get spoiled. It affects everything else. And so these type of regulations sort of put a stamp on that this river is special.
Just one thought though.
Hold on, Kathleen, please hold your comments. All right, you're not a member of this group. We'll take all public comments at the end of the meeting.
Just as a follow-up, I read, my thing, you know, something like this is, there's a tendency when we're in fisheries management to monitor, and then when we see a decline, we take action. I don't believe in wild trout management in, you know, 2021 in Montana, that we have to wait to watch these things decline before we take action. So the predicate for conservative wild stock management doesn't have to be a population decline. It can be a statement of policy. It is our policy direction to be conservative in our wild stock fisheries management. And so the predicate doesn't have to be a decline. It just has to be, this is our policy statement, this is the direction we move. These are the principles under which we will manage wild stocks.
Sort of building off of that, can it be a statement of almost best practices?
Well, I would think that would be what you do, exactly. The policy statement wouldn't just, there would be specific things in it.
And some of the best practices might be single hook, no trouble hooks.
Catch and release.
Could be catch and release for brown and rainbow trout.
The idea that catch and release imparts no mortality.
We're not
No, I don't
suggesting
think
that.
that, but
We're not suggesting that at all.
keeping sends a different message, and it definitely is mortality. It may be small, but it goes back to that. The Madison's a special river. I don't think of going to New Zealand or Argentina and anticipating of keeping any fish.
But harvest is an important part of management too. To manage these and just use catch and release, I think is not right. You said we're not here to pretend we're fishery biologists, and we're not. for this group, and therefore I think we should not be making fisheries management decisions without at least talking to fish biologists and department.
Many of these would be only recommendations.
Yeah.
It's really.
And all the recommendations.
I would disagree with that totally. Just say that our job is to make recommendations related to unheralded pressure on this river. And that once we make a recommendation, then Commissioner Byer's going to have a whole commission meeting to argue against it and argue in favor of trawl bugs. And I think Dr. Rice and her staff will have now almost 6 weeks to prepare reasons why we should be killing 5 brown
But
trout in
it's
the river.
based on what we feel. Like John said, oh, I feel.
We're trying to put something in
I feel
place, Mike,
Mark.
20 years. I
That's
didn't
not
say that.
true.
I didn't say that about Barb.
I know, I pointed it there.
Yeah, I think Barb's is controversial. Personally, I think Barb is such a great idea. I know a lot of people don't. And so, like you said, that's a 50-50. And so maybe that's when we just kind of leave to the outfitter and the culture of their guide staff. And like, hey, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to all go barbless. And we feel it's the right thing. And maybe that's what happens. Maybe we put that into sort of a code of conduct. But some of this other stuff like treble hooks, I mean, it's awfully hard to argue that a big Rapala with a couple sets of treble hooks on them that are barbed are really damaging to that fish. You grab those needle-nosed players, you go like this and the mandibles hanging off. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I don't need a biologist to tell me that, right? Neither do you. We just don't. You know, the catch and release part, I think that's a culture. And I think 20 years from now, I don't really care for me personally. This is not asking anybody else to think this way, but I need to think, I put on this board, I need to think 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. Oh, that group of people that got together really had some great foresight and they protected things because they saw where things were headed. Temperature change, climate change, with crowding, with population coming to Bozeman. And they got in front of it and they said, it wasn't real popular with some of the old school folks, but they said catch and release only. And just some things like that, that I think progressive things, like Commissioner Byer said, creative thinking. That's what we're doing here. We're not trying to say, oh, we're so smart, because we understand spawning and the different age groups and the census data. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to do big picture stuff.
It was just 6 years ago on the Beaverhead that brown trout population of the Woodward was so high that Matt Yeager was proposing a 50 trout limit, mandatory harvest.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
And that was a catch and release. But the populations were,
Good idea.
I'm saying it, that
How'd that work out?
Not well, not well at all.
They didn't go.
Anyway.
They better quality took care of that.
And Mike, we're not doing something here to try to vote on anything. No, we need to bring a biologist in about that. You know, we're just throwing around.
let's have a.
I just did, I mean, I don't know what that achieves, right? We bring the biologist in. I really feel like that's
Or
Dr.
give me
Ro-
the proposals that
that's
you're
Dr.
proposing. to
You,
look at.
yeah, okay, so my proposal would be, and I can't really speak to Hepkin from Yellowstone Park down to Hepkin. But this is based on the current regs from Quake Lake to Ennis Lake, that you could just simply strike in any place where you have rainbow trout and strike the language, except anglers 14 years of age or younger may take 1 trout. And in possession, any size, I would strike that language. And then I would add single hook in front of lures and the artificial lures only, artificial single hook lures only.
Are you proposing ideas that are sort of clean up the regulations that are sort of controversial? Like, there's a general agreement here that single hooks, you know, are better than trebles and so forth and so on, we could, have a catch and release river. Is that the kind of thing you're looking for now?
Well, I think you have two sections where you can kill 5 brown trout in the
Right.
upper river.
Yeah.
I'm really not focused on the lower river right now. I think this group needs to do that, but we've got a couple of years to do that.
I would advocate to consider the lower river as a spectacular fishery as well. Then if we're going to consider techniques, that we also look at that.
And again, making a recommendation to the department and the commission. And I think that's where the biologists have to get involved. And if I sit in a commission meeting and Dr. Rice says it's a really bad idea and here are 3 reasons why, then I doubt the commission would adopt the recommendation in this group.
As a group member here, I'd like to hear Dr. Rice come here and tell me those recommendations, so I don't look like an idiot from the commission.
Dr. Rice.
I'm not commenting on that. I don't have the authority to
What's our new biologist that took over Dave Mosier?
Make Duncan.
I'm sorry, Nate.
Make Duncan.
Could we invite Mr. Duncan in? Would that be a good idea to see that? Go through that process. It seems like another. Like to.
And if Dr. Rice doesn't have the authority, I'm sure, I'll have the department here. I don't know.
We don't have the authority right now to comment on the proposal. That I have to go back with the proposal and work it through the director's office before we have an opinion on the proposal. That's standard for any of our actions. That's not specific to this. So
I think
whatever.
A lot of us have our ideas, but some of us are feeling emphatic enough about them. Just
I mean, that in the case of
Well,
the sink,
I'm not comfortable.
if we dismantle this and say, are you uncomfortable with artificial single hook lures only?
My feelings, my thoughts on it, just went through the 2022 regulation modifications. Finalized at the last commission.
But we deferred on the Madison because we were going to have this work group look at it.
No, so what we did was the 2022 overall package went to the commission in August as a proposal. The brown trout regulations were separate from that. Brown trout regulations were finalized in August. The 2022 regulations get finalized in October, but that package has already gone out for public comment and will go final. This would be in addition to that. So
is comment period for 2022 regulation, is that comment period done?
yeah, we got one.
But if we were to make a recommendation and it were adopted by the commission at the October meeting, what would the process be?
So the process would be what we call the one-stop process. So we do proposal and final at the meeting. The only opportunity for public comment would be at the meeting.
Right, but it would be just like the brown trout, similar to the brown trout one-stop shop. This is a meeting that you had at the last.
Not the same because the brown trout was scoped. So there was extensive scoping done. It's pretty rare. I'm not saying it can't be done. It's pretty rare to take a regulation that's not an emergency regulation to the commission with no scoping or public comment.
Is it fair to ask, did Fish, Wildlife and Parks, looking at 2022 reg changes, didn't feel any kind of need to alter them going forward? So the one comment you got after the comment period, is it going to be status quo going forward?
Yeah, we don't have a definite proposal yet, but it's looking like what we will propose is to carry forward what we proposed in August with no changes.
Is it possible to get Duncan here to talk about trout biology on Madison for our next meeting?
That's up to Commissioner Walsh.
And kitchen release, hooking mortality and harvest?
Yeah, like I say, it's up to Commissioner Walsh. Who from
And that way- And then as a work group, you get regulation changes we proposing, or would like to propose. We can look at them prior to next meeting and be prepared for it.
I mean, I think you and Mac might be qualified to really evaluate whatever information Mike wants to impart, but that's fine. If we want to delay this, I'm fine with that. I'd like to take just a kind of barometer around the room and see if people want to defer this. I think what we're talking about is probably deferring any changes to the fishing regs in Madison until 2023. Quick check in. How do you feel?
I agree that for things, your knee-jerk reaction, I want to separate some of these regulations from managing fish counts and fishery to also the prestige of the Madison River. And there is a message that we send with things like single hook, no bait, and very limited harvest or catch and release, that this is a special river and we take care of it. And sometimes that's directly related to fishery, and sometimes it's part of stamping that definition of special experience. I do think getting as much information on current fishery trends can't hurt. If we delay it a year, it's not the end of the world. I'd be very comfortable right now with single hook, no bait, no scented baits, no scented artificial baits like Berkeley gummy or Berkeley gulp, which some guides and fishermen use, which is pulled into a fish as greedily as a crawler. So those things I'd be very comfortable with now. There are times, Mike's got a point, that sometimes you want to eradicate brook trout, or you want to, there's times where harvest is a management tool. So I'm not comfortable just completely. I love the idea of catch and release. I think it sends a message, but I think we probably do need to.
We're really talking about the section from Barney to Ennis Lake, and whether you think that should be open to background trout.
That I'm pretty comfortable with because of the decline of the brown trout. I would be comfortable with catch and release.
Chris?
Well, we're missing the point. We're trying to get the river overcrowded. Figure that out. Let's work on that. Send a biologist, try to relieve the minute time. Why you end up with what? John's recommendations and that's traffic. Figure it out.
Idea.
I would be in favor of in some way sending the message that we are for long-term status, health, fisheries, whether you call it best practices, or I like your conservative wild stock management concept of single hooks. Barbless, I can back off. I would support that, but I'm not going to die on that hill. It's all catch and release in those sections. And I think that could be a good starting step for us to send that message. And I'm all for hearing more from the biologists, because I think that hearing from the biologists will also help us as we talk about pressure on the river. Impacts of both guided and non-guided fishing. So I'd love to get that. I don't see that as critical to at least sending the message on these simple ideas, simple changes we can recommend for the process.
So what is it that these biologists are going to tell us? That there are X number of fish in X number of miles and that kind of thing, that as a result of the amount of traffic, we should encourage harvest and all that kind of stuff. Is that where we're headed? Is that why we're asking them to come?
I think it's valuable to kind of confirm current trends, although those current trends might be within the natural, Pat had a point, like, are the drop in the ground trend within the natural band, or is it a unprecedented change in fish populations? Those things are of interest to me. I'm not a fisheries biologist, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what we live on, right? That's our bread and butter. So I think that certain things like, no bait, no synthetic artificials, no treble hooks, that's a no-brainer.
But these guys are going to give us information that would support that or not support that.
Probably be unclear.
The biologists would give you population information. That's what you get from the biologists. If you wanted other questions answered, like impacts from barbless versus barbed, or other information like that, we would bring in, with the permission from Commissioner Walsh, whoever's best to answer. That would be helpful to know as what information you need, and then we'll get the right people here with the permission of Commissioner Walsh. But what the local biologists would tell you as the population trends.
And Dr. Rice, when would we have the latest shocking information?
Well, if all of the information that's currently available is already publicly available through Fish NT, so anyone can actually get it right now.
That's from the talking last week.
I don't know if they've got it entered in, but it will be soon. Do you know, Andrew?
I know that they're still shocking recaps, because I just.
Oh, yeah,
sent
they
out an
haven't
email
done
to
that,
everybody.
right.
So I think 27th, if I remember right, is the
Yeah,
last
so
of
they
the
haven't
March
done their
section.
they haven't finished the recap runs yet, so we'll do those and then get the information in. And everything up until the fall is already in the system.
So the bottom line then of these guys, or Mike coming to talk to us, is to help us make a decision on whether we recommend catch and release or barbless hooks and all that kind of thing is what I'm gathering. Okay.
Allison?
I think my gut, listening to all this, I'm not an angler regular, I don't know all this. I feel I would not be doing my due diligence without a little more information. This was not on my radar at all coming into this meeting tonight. Well, I think it's a good discussion, and I do think we are charged with preserving the biological health of the river. I don't feel tonight, I think I gotta absorb it. Maybe I don't know if I necessarily need a biologist to come in, but I think I need to think about it before our next meeting, to be honest. And I don't feel this is I think we need to send a message that we're here, but I don't know if this is exactly the right way to do it. I guess personally, I feel wasn't on my radar, wasn't even thinking on this for tonight. I was focused on the things that were charged to us at the last meeting. So I would rather wait to decide.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, the idea of catch and release through the length of the river, single hooks and things like that, those are all good things that, if we can get them into the 2022 regulations, that probably is a good thing and send the right message about how this group is going to make recommendations. So I'm kind of okay with that. I mean, there's a bigger issue of overuse of the river, how we're going to manage that. And maybe if we can get these smaller things out of the way, then we can start to focus on that. And I think once we get past the just, we're going to make this a catch and release river, single hooks, and send that message, then we can start working on bigger problems. And then it would be good to have Mike come in, because besides just giving you the raw fish count, There's statistical methods we can use, and we used them in the 2188 for the US for Northwestern Energy, where he looked at, is there a correlation between the changes in the fish population or size distribution and flows and things like that. And he was also going to look at fishing pressure and things like that, and whether there's a correlation there, but he didn't do it as part of the 2188. That's only reflected in what comes out of the dam.
That correlation work's getting done by someone else, not by Mike. So again, that's where it would be helpful if I can get a list of what information it is you're looking for, I can make sure we can get you the right information.
Well, for me, I would rather respond to the situation that has been presented in front of us rather than reacting to data. The data changes, and it always has and always will. And a lot of trout populations are cycles, and you'll watch big fish years climb, and then the little fish years dwindle, and because the big fish are eating the little fish, and then it all flips back around. And then there's years where the river is just stuffed with little fish and the big fish have gone away. And it's cyclical. So rather than chasing that data, I think there's a couple of we just talked about it, treble hooks, catch and release. Those seem to be the two big topics. They're pretty simple. I'd rather put something in place that's a big picture idea, a culture, a philosophy of the sacred Madison River, rather than micromanaging every year and changing the regulations because fish populations were stronger or weak. These two topics here, treble hooks, single barbless hook or single hook, barbless hook, let's remove it, and catch and release seem to be no-brainers to me that should be put into place.
Yeah, so just, I think our charge for this committee would be to, if we're addressing those types of things, is to package it in a policy statement that isn't based upon some pressing biological crisis. It's intended to avoid a biological crisis, and it's intended to capture sort of the forward thinking of what we think this fishery should be. You make that policy statement, and that becomes adopted by the commission, which is then the direction to the department. What specific regulations they take or make are just within the bounds of that policy. That's all. You see, so I mean, we could recommend specifics like single hook artificial lures only, or a minimum, a maximum size limit to fish that are harvested, keeping from targeting spawning fish. I mean, there's a million different ways to configure a conservative wild stock management approach, but it's the statement of what that means and what the boundaries are that is the most valuable thing this group can do, because you don't have to be a biologist to make a policy statement. The biologist will come back and tell you whether you make a mistake or not. Biologically is what you're doing, accomplishing something. But we are here to direct the future, the way this fishery looks in the future. It's not to wait till something crashes. It's to say, hey, it may be perfectly intact today, but here's the direction we want it. So I'm thinking of it, and I will volunteer to write a policy statement like that based on our conversations here, and it would step down to whatever regulation, whatever level of detail you want to go to, but it would give you the rationale as to why you got there. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah,
So,
much more eloquently said than what I said, but it's exactly what I'm thinking.
And Mike?
I think, I like the ideas of Chris, Allison, our directives. Basically, we recently went to Brown Travels, through 3 public scoping meetings, two outfitter meetings with wildlife parks, and then a focus group meeting to even come up with some of the proposed reg changes. And the first meeting started out with proposed changes. Hey, this is what we're thinking of doing, and it took a long time, it took since June to get through what those changes would look like on the river, and potentially what effects it would have on populations, and that was important. And it included single artificial growers.
That changed in the commission.
Right, but you had the proposed rate changes on these. And that's, I'd be more comfortable with some idea of changes, or if it's a policy statement, Madison is currently managed to do.
I know where you stand. I guess what, for sure, we're gonna defer this till the next meeting. I will take it upon myself to coordinate with Mike Duncan and Dr. Rice and her staff and make sure we have the right people. And we'll do that as part, we'll try to couple that with ongoing dialogue about capping recreational use. And my intent right now is to, once we have good ideas on how we're going to cap non-commercial recreational use on this river, to then get into the final rule on how we're cap commercial use.
Can we request a specific question from Mike for the next meeting?
Sure.
Mike Duncan, the biologist. Is there would catch and release regulations be a detriment to the fishery? Or is that, Mike's comment?
But those, if we could get those questions collectively, Commissioner Walsh, if you could collect those and work through me,
I'll do that.
I'll coordinate getting the information or getting whoever we want to the meeting. So rather than you all assigning who the questions go to, let me work with the staff on that.
Perfect. Thanks, Ellen.
So Chris, yeah, any comments?
Yeah, I think I support the whole conversation we've had here. This was pretty good. I think sending a message of conservation on Madison is a good message to be sending. I think kind of like Eileen was mentioning, pretty rare to send a non-emergency rule through the process without having scoping on it. So I would prefer that we had scoping if we were going to make a recommendation to the committee along these lines. I think it's a good message, and I would support it.
I think it's also important that we have the latest shocking results set in September 27th. So we'll plan a meeting sometime after September 27th.
As you're kind of thinking of questions for staff and they can answer, one of the big questions that we have is how to manage non-commercial usage on the river. We've got ideas on the commercial cap and various things, lots of details to work through. But on the non-commercial, I'd love to get educated a little bit about what are the regulatory or legal capabilities or limitations on permits, on fees that can be charged to non-commercial. What parameters do we have to think about?
I can answer that pretty easily right now.
And I don't know whether you want to use it now or, but at some point.
Because we,
That's a great segue into our next topic.
well, we had this conversation when the rule was written, and it's actually pretty broad. You know, you have the authority to develop rules for non-commercial use of the river. So that could be a permit system, a day system, there's a million different ways you could do it, so as long as it fits within that authority of regulating non-commercial river use, that the sky is right open. In terms of setting fees, it's all doable. That it would depend on what the fees look like as to whether or not it could be done through rule versus a statute change. But I would rather say to you, it's wide open, come up with the ideas, and then let us figure out the mechanism of how to do it. But it's pretty broad. Your authority is pretty broad. Like I said, as long as it relates to that non-commercial river use.
Eileen, this is done in other states, media provinces, not commercial management. And often, there's a cost. It's usually not a line system. It's utilized. And generally, there's a fee collected. $5, $2. And I know in Montana, on the Smith River, residents, non-residents alike, not with guided trip, pay a fee. And that's a recreation plan. Is that a specific? I know there are some unique things to the Smith River, or is the same legal structure that allows a fee to be collected for recreation management on the Smith River also an umbrella that can be put?
So the majority of our, what we call license fees, go through statute. Those are set by statute, but there are, if there's statute authority for setting a fee on something, then the actual fee can be set in rule. So that's why I say don't bog yourself down with the mechanism of how to do it. Think about what it is you want to do and then let us figure out the mechanism to do it. So it really, anything's possible. A system like the Smith could be doable on the Madison, or some other systems like the ones in Michigan or the others that we've looked at previously. So there's lots of different options out there.
But what I'm hearing is some of those options require statutory approval. But
Yeah, and it's hard for us to tell you, unless there's a hard idea down on paper. But the legislature will be back in session here pretty soon. Yeah, we'll really realistically, we'll be starting to get ready for next session in the winter. So it's not that far away.
Okay, so before we leave the prior topic, just so I can respond quickly if there's emergency around a list of questions that we want Mike to address at this meeting. If I could get those from you by Friday, that would be helpful. And then I can. So, in the little bit of time we have left tonight, my thought was just to get some ideas going. And the idea here is to just start germinating ideas and further discussion. And for those of you in the community, to have some discussions with folks around Ennis or elsewhere in Montana about, great solutions and ideas on how we address recreational, non-commercial use on the river. And I think the message I got pretty clearly from the commissioners was, hey, we really need to address both. If we're going to cap commercial, we really have to couple that up with some mechanism for reducing or capping on commercial use. So, Mac, I know you had an idea you wanted to share.
Like tonight, when I drive back to Helena, who knows what's going to come through your head, right? So I was driving back last week when we got done, and we done with our conversations on FAS. And to preface this, it's my position at this I'll actually mow this position, but I agree with it 100%. That the single biggest issue facing us is the management of our FAS. If you look at the data, it says 70% of the dissatisfaction occurred put-ins and takeouts. That's where it was. And so in some ways, the conversation about FAS was maybe one of the most important conversations we were going to have if we were going to solve the crowding issue. That's where it is. The data was crystal clear. When it was teased out, 60, 70% of the dissatisfaction was how traffic flow is happening, frustration over getting on the river, off the river, you know, the whole scene. So that discussion spurred some thinking in my part when I was driving home. And I think about how access points are managed by the U.S. Forest Service, how state parks manages access to trailheads. And it's managed to some degree by limiting parking. If the parking's full, you can't go. And so there is a concept, and I realize that there's some real issues with logistics of how we currently do things. But imagine for a moment revisions to the fishing access sites that not only constituted the benefits that you had brought up so well, Dave, but flow in and out. But what if it was also constrained to only handle a requisite number of vehicles? And what if, when that's done, it's done? And you either have to move to a different one, which puts you in a different section, or it's done. Snooze, you lose. And you create a physical bottleneck to accessing the river rather than a very complicated and highly expensive. And we do that as we work over the FAS sites. We set in a pretty comprehensive set of suggestions, recommendations, and prioritize them. And okay, these are the physical things we need to do, but what if the construct of that included basically management by size? It only accommodates so many.
I'd ask Chris.
Well, Trailheads at the Forest Service does that exactly. It does that exactly. Now I can just imagine what it would do in the initial conversations, people blow a gasket. Outfitters got a parking place. Well, yeah, they actually do. And they actually pay for it, And so, but it would be a way to approach it. I realize there's a lot of issues with it. I'm not going to look at the negatives. I'm throwing it out there as a larger picture vision, because the alternative is permitting, drawings, fees, this incredibly intense thing on an ever-growing, unguided segment of the fishery that, boy, getting your hands around that's going to be a real problem. So what if you just physically design it so it only takes so many?
Just playing off that, one of the obvious questions is shuttles. And,
Oh, yeah.
How quickly they
Immediately.
But related to that is your analogy to campgrounds and such. It's reservations.
Correct. Well, some of them are and some of them aren't.
That's right. Some are
If
first
they're
come,
full, they're
first serve,
full.
but other ones are, you can reserve, or they reserve so many of them in advance, and some of them are available. Just not advocating, but just another idea.
One trap I've witnessed occur over and over and over again with such a passionate, the Mona Lisa fly fishing here, everybody's got, really wants to do the process, is jumping into the mechanics early. Is it right away? It's just to do this, to do that. I think we have to be careful of jumping into mechanics right now. And what we first need to have a discussion on is define the problem. I would strongly, while I agree that we can improve, streamline FAS sites. I've been guiding that river for years and years. We host well over 1,000 anglers that are company guides. I hear from guides every day. I hear from clients. We gain feedback from 1,500 fishing clients every year on Madison. And I hear over and over again, we've got to do something. There's lots of concern, there's lots of frustration. Don't hear concern about the fishing sites. It's a little bit like going to an amusement park. You might have to wait in line, that you don't enjoy waiting in line, but you're there for the experience of the ride. If the ride is awesome, you go home happy. If the ride's not awesome and it stalls out, and it's frustrating, you're really disappointed with your entire vacation. The problem that I hear, the frustrations that I hear and have been hearing about for years, and really amplified the last 2 years, is the experience on the river. So that's, I think, what we have to
I'd
address.
say the overall experience is that there's crowding in the river. One is both commercial and non-commercial use. And they've got some ideas on commercial use. Sure, that's good.
Sure. Well, I've talked a lot of, and at some point we can invite in some of these river managers from other states and provinces, but there's the turnstile method is sort of like the parking lot's closed, that's not commonly used. The default mechanism, there's a method used on Multinae, the Smith River, the Grand Canyon, the Selway, where it's a lottery, but those are very low volume use rivers or multiple days. That's a complicated process, but it's worth it because it's a big giant trip. Day use rivers like the Madison, generally the way they're managed is you set a capacity. We're going to let X number of people go down, the river in a season. Whitewater raft rivers are often managed by a daily capacity. With the fishery, we need to probably also consider what is the total number of angling days. Both can be part of the conversation. But at some point, you have to say, here's the number of humans that go down the river, and then how do we manage to that number? On day use rivers, it's a lot easier for a lot of rivers to have what's split allocation. It's very easier to manage commercial operators. We're already under a permit system. We have a lot more tools there. The general public, the most common way is a reservation system. It's what they do in Michigan, it's what they do in British Columbia, it's what they do in Oregon. So for example, in Michigan, if you want to float the Pier Marquette, put a boat on it, the recreation.gov, you buy a boater pass, you have that pass on the river, and they have a set number boats that they'll allow. They manage guides separately. They have livery services that have an allocation of boats that can rent, and then they have an allocation for the general public of how many boats they can use. And that way for sure you've got a permit. It's easy. You put your credit card in, print it out, and for sure you can float versus driving an hour, getting there and getting turned around in the parking lot. Come back in an hour. There's all kinds of complications. Parking lots are fluid. Boats are coming in. Shuttle drivers are taking them out as fast as they're coming in. They're going down here. It's this kind of fluid flowing process of what those parking lots look like. But there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. The most important thing is we have to, at some point, define the capacity. How is that? And define capacity for commercial and define capacity for.
Yeah, and we're closer on the commercial.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get good ideas. There's some good ideas on commercial.
Red on even or something, water the long day.
than the river. So 100.
Sign the passing vote versus leaning.
Fines.
This isn't a proposal, but it's just
I like
something
Yeah, it's an interesting concept.
for us to think about as we get in here. Is, do we differentiate between fishermen that are walkway into any part of the river versus floaters? What is the issue we're trying to address? And we may have a different perspective, different regulatory approach to floating versus, I want to say unlimited, but maybe that it is for some time. Go over it, walk away from the shore.
And to piggyback on your comment, Dan, there's weight angling, there's float angling. We're using boats to fish, whether you jump out it, but there's also recreational floating that we should also
That's
have,
probably another area.
Especially on the road.
especially.
Yeah.
I just actually have a question along those lines. Am I correct that guides from Montana cannot guide in Idaho? And is it the reverse in Montana?
Great
In other words,
question.
Sensitive question.
I know a couple guys. So in Montana, there's outfitters and there's guides. Guides have to work for the outfitter. Idaho is the same system, except there's less outfitting. So for anybody who go to Idaho, become a licensed guide and work for an outfitter. It's much more challenging than Idaho income. So what you hear around Madison, oh yeah, we can't go to Idaho. Yeah, it's not true. You probably can't go to Idaho outfit. Certainly go to Idaho guide. Inverse, the guide from Idaho can come to Montana, get enough days to qualify to be an outfitter. So they can become an outfitter in Montana. Because we have no limits on outfitters right now.
Should we?
Idaho.
Should we?
Yes.
It's a different system. So in Idaho, they're limited in outfitters. With the Henry's Board.
It's like they've allocated the number of outfitters. Right, where we out here outfitting is a occupational license. And so you're either qualified to have that occupation, whereas in some other states like Idaho, now of course they did this a long time ago. And so they said, well, there's only going to be 7 outfitters. So in a way, they sort of use that as allocation. We have 230 outfitters licensed.
The prime one, I think, was one with this is,
Should
you
it
know,
be
right now in the proposed rule, there's no differentiation between resident and non-resident
Right.
outfitters. And I would agree with you.
Well, there's another important point. In Montana, there's no such thing as resident or non-resident outfitter. You're a Montana outfitter. You can live in Florida and be a licensed Montana outfitter. You live in Florida and be a licensed Montana captain. There's no residency associated with outfitting with guiding licenses in Montana or Idaho. So why are we looking at that?
Why are we what?
Why are we looking at that? Why don't we put a cap on the outfit? You got 230 outfitters with guides on Madison River. Pretty steep.
Well, that's what the SRP program is all about, and that's what we're here for.
For an outfitter's license next year, it is. And we got
Well,
330 guys.
it's a little more complicated than that. I mean,
More to it than that, it's like.
Yeah.
But your question is really valid, Chris, and it's one that needs to be answered. It's polarizing, and I'm in your camp on that. Why are we going to cap commercial days and still let new outfitters come into the system? For me, all that's going to do is take the existing days that we've capped and jack the price of them through the roof, because you've got artificially allowing new demand in new outfitters coming in, and you've got a set supply. So there's only one thing that can happen. These days go up artificially in value, which a lot of people are opposed to seeing these outfitter licenses go through the roof. I'm just saying.
The logical response to that isn't capping outfitters statewide or anything, it's capping the SRP. How many special use permits can be used on Madison?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, but I think there could be a disconnect.
Just
so you know, on the hunting side, we're capped with net hunting client use. I mean, there have been places where caps have been put in place or limitations are put in. But the logical place here in Madison, we talk about capping SRP, and oddly enough, that never got traction in the department's plans.
Well, there's a reason for that, and that's because.
Let's guys, we're kind of running out of time. Let's get back.
That's for another day.
Not just any more ideas on non-commercial use. Again,
Yeah,
all I want to do is just get the ideas going.
I think there's a short point on non-commercial use. Where it flows from Brian's. If we're gonna set numbers and manage non-commercial use, it's critical, in my opinion, to know what that number is going into the program. Right now, there's 263,000 annual visitors. As center rolls around, but it's based on mail-in surveys, and it's only annual days. On the lower river, Chris could probably talk more about this. Their method for estimating use on the lower river is based on the amount of cars and parking lots on certain days, and estimating the amount of users per car, and that's anywhere from, in 2019, 2018, 450,000 user days to almost 725,000 user days. So, going into this, if we're going to manage those numbers, I think it's good to assessment actual use.
For sure, when we get there, that's great. But let's just say, let's assume that we want to restrict non-commercial use. Just be thinking about how you would best recommend doing it.
Right. At what number?
It's irrelevant. It's in how would you do it? Not.
But if you don't know the number, how are you going to manage how many users are on the grid? How is that relevant?
Well, I mean, I could say that about commercial use. I could say why 2020 and 2019. I mean, why those
That's
numbers?
the latest management numbers we have. I'll have it. There's answers for that.
Right.
You know the numbers.
Okay, well, we'll get the best numbers we can. And then we'll still have an issue of how do you restrict it?
I think what Nancy's talking about, if I might, is sort of the concept of how we would manage the non-commercial use, right? Okay, if the numbers, whatever it is, let's come up with a concept, and then we'll plug the numbers into the concept. And so, yeah,
Right.
I like just finish really quickly a concept that may or may not work. When we took a year and we took the kids and we moved to San Juan Islands in 2018, and there's ferry boats that go back and forth from Anacortes to Friday Harbor, and there's a very limited supply on every one of those ferry boats, so they sell reservations on the boat. A year out from sailing date, they sell a third. 2 months out, they sell a third, and then 2 days out, they sell the final third. So if you decided that you did that for the 8 boat ramps from Lions down to Burnt Tree, and you decided that Lions gets 30 boats a day and Burnt Tree gets 15, or however you did it, and then you release those days, and then they sell out. And when you get that day, you print off on your computer at home a permit, and that one permit goes in your dashboard, one permit goes in your boat. And your ALS number, you only get 5 launches per launch per ALS number, then you got to move to another one. Something along those lines. It sounds complicated, but I love the simplicity of the per parking spots, but I'm not sure it's something like I described that they use in Washington State races.
John, to piggyback on your statement, the batch release is not foreign in river allocation and permitting. They use that in other places like Oregon. They recognize, some people coming from Missoula or out of state need to buy tickets, air tickets. So days are trickled out in batches. And then there's also days, first and foremost, they develop a pool, an allocated pool of like, here's how many people are gonna float down the river. And then from that, they disperse it and kind of trickle it out over the course of 6 months. So that the person that wants to go, like, I just got Wednesday off, all the days are already used up months in advance. So you allow the early planners to plan, you also allow the people that are local that don't plan, and they're gonna float 5 months in advance, they plan it a week in advance or 2 days in advance.
Brandon,
It's exactly my point. You know how many ferry boats, how many seats are on the ferry boat. You know how many in Oregon, you know the capacity of how many boats.
Yeah, you're gonna have to, that's a
I know that
complicated
number.
conversation, but that'll have to be done, right? We're gonna have to collectively determine, and that's complicated, then you have to ask, on the fishing side of things, are we only concerned about when there's typically a lot of people on the river, 3 or 4 months? Or do we also consider cumulative total, not a lot of people fish in March, but when you put a wireworm in the fish's mouth in March, it still leaves a scar, right? So that's a nuance when you come to fishing versus just a regular raft. But one way or the other, you gotta, whether you do it at season capacity or you do a piece, you gotta have that complicated conversation. And then once you define capacity, then you gotta, all right, we've determined 1 million angling hours is our max, or 450,000 angling days is what we're gonna go to. We're gonna keep it right here.
Here's what I would say. So we're gonna get as much data as we can, but it's gonna be imperfect. And I think the issue that, started all this is that somehow the current volume of traffic, particularly in the midsummer months, is not acceptable, or it's at risk of being unacceptable. And it may be a risk to fish health. So we're probably not going to know that one both ways.
Just to add one complicating factor, are all launches equal? When you talk about slots or capacity, that's constrained in some ways is, 7 to 9 or 10 in the morning. If somebody who's coming out and launching at noon or 1 o'clock from Lions, has very different impact on the social experience. Nobody else is there. So it's just complicated.
Okay, so our time's up. I want to open this up for public comment and.
Can I make one comment before we do that? Here, Commissioner, sorry about that. One thing I would really recommend to this group is there's a book put together by Doug Whitaker and Bo Shelby for the River Management Society. It goes through, it's a review of approaches and existing systems for river application. It walks you through essentially the history of it, what systems are existing, how have they worked, how have they got through those processes, what data are you needed for determining carrying capacity, all of that kind of information. It's a really good general 101 level of river recreation management that I would recommend that we all read. It is free online. It is called Allocating River Use by Doug Whitaker and Bo Shelby. And it is a really good resource for doing this exact exercise that we'll be going through. So
much for the recommendation
on that.
One thought to leave you with, and maybe we'll make this into the next meeting, is the lower river has food hour restrictions that go into effect every year by date. And I know this year, particularly for outfitters, it's complicated when we as a commission, with the staff at FWP, make those decisions based on the prior few days of temperature readings. And you might just think about, is there a recommendation the group wants to make on some kind of food hour restriction on the upper river? So it's not, so let's say if you have, you're an outfitter, you have a lodge, it's less of a guessing game in terms of clients who are flying in out of state. With that, I want to thank you all again for the second meeting. I think we made an important decision tonight. We got kind of mired down in the fishing reg topic, but I think that'll come back and we'll have a great meeting in earlier mid-October and deal with that.
Want to try to set the date now?
The only problem is I don't know what the staff's schedule looks like, and we have a doodle poll that we'll probably run on that one. And as soon as I
We
check,
will work around whatever days we can get together.
Not sure, but it's
That's why getting those questions will be very helpful.
You wanted the questions by Friday?
yeah, the questions to submit. And I assume you'll need a week or so to respond. I think it puts us at the week of October 11th. I know it's hunting and bird hunting season.
What do you think?
Just that, look. How about we run out of doodle poll for that week? I'm
First
sorry,
week of
how-
October.
what's that?
Second.
Bad week.
How about the following week,
All
week of the 18th?
That's much better.
Okay,
Which week was that, October 18th?
yeah, week of October 18th.
You want us to? Why don't we just put together, say, 3 or 4 weeks on a doodle poll and send it out?
Yeah,
Less.
not 3 or 4 weeks,
3,
3 or 4 days.
well, I didn't hear, did you pick a week that worked for everyone? Week of
Week of
October?
the 18th.
No
Week of
one,
the 18th.
no one likes it,
Okay.
but it's the week of the 18th.
Yeah, well, then I'll come back to bite.
That is the one week that doesn't work for us. So you
Boom,
You
totally.
literally wouldn't get any of the fish stuff that week, sorry, we're all in Glasgow, unless you wanted to do the meeting in Glasgow.
The 18th is Glasgow.
Week of the 25th.
Week of the 25th.
I'm out of the country. Until Friday.
And that's when the commission meetings on Thursday.
On the 28th.
Yeah, week of 11th. October 11th.
I'll be on. Just
2 weeks from now, that first week of October, is that too soon for things?
I think that's gonna be tough to get the electroshocking data. Give them a chance to respond to our questions.
We can make that work. If that's the week that'll work, we can work around that.
Like, I think if you shot for 2 weeks from tonight, it would be October 6th.
Yeah, I would have,
I'm in Canada.
I would have phone ins for that.
That's just one. But I like the 30th first. That sounds like you and I read.
How many are could not be here the week of the other staff?
You have a
Go ahead, Mike. He did last time.
Yeah. Then we can,
Close.
yeah. then we can do,
The fish manager will be, and, yeah, the week of the 18th will work. for fish stuff.
Okay. I think it's the 11th. The week of
November
the
3rd.
25th. You know, understand that, I mean, we'd just be kicking this out to 23, the 23 reg set.
If we can do the real poll, see how it works. Maybe there's a day in there that kind of works for
Or, I make a suggestion.
Sure.
If you're looking at getting regulations on the October meeting, you're gonna want to do it 2 weeks from tonight. Anything later than that is too late.
Okay. Yeah, I just think we picked this down.
Is that, if that's not an issue, then I think you've got your rule recommendation that I'll get drafted up for the commission meeting, so then there isn't a rush for the October meeting. Unless it was something else you wanted to take to the October meeting.
Just those, I think it's three things, right?
I've got what you have right now is the elimination of the two rules.
Right.
And then
Extension.
adopt, going back to the 2021 for those walkway sections. Then I thought, did you come up with a regulation? No, so.
But if you want regulations to go in effect in 2022, and you would make a recommendation by when?
If you want it at the commission meeting in October, waiting longer than 2 weeks from now is too late. If you want something to go to the October meeting.
I mean, the thing is, again, we could make this recommendation, simply a recommendation. And then staff that who will advise the commission whether it's a good recommendation.
Recommendation discussions, single.
Yeah, so the
Hooks.
Right.
So that's it.
the proposal that was made by the commissioner was from Quig Lake to Ennis Lake, strike the exception for the 14 years of age and older,
Okay.
and change to trout and not rainbow trout, artificial single lures only. That was the one proposal I heard that was made.
To strike rainbow trout, right?
Strike rainbow trout and go to just the general trout.
Mike and Mac would rather not.
I'm not prepared to. No, I'm sorry.
Is there any part of it single, but would you recommend?
I just think it's piecemeal, and I don't think the urgency is not there.
All right.
I agree that.
So we probably address this in, I don't know, March or anytime.
2026.
Yeah. Okay. We have a lot of time to dialogue.
Well, why don't we just send out a doodle poll?
Well, I think we gotta kind of get,
A doodle poll?
Gotta get a week first.
yeah, let's go back, let's tackle the commercial use topic. So I think we're in November.
First week of November.
November 3rd.
Late that week. 4th or 5th. Let's do.
Let us send out the doodle poll
Yeah.
for that first week in November, and then
Yep.
and then we can take it from there. If that doesn't work, then we'll look for another.
That's for the week of the 15th. Of November. Okay. Yep. Yep, let's do that. Any public comments? Limited to 2 minutes.
All right, I'll try and make it quick. The first thing is I was down in Dillon, dropped my son off at school. And heard from a papa of a 15-year-old who now believes he cannot fish the beaverhead or the big bull. Because he's a good spinner fisherman. And he doesn't believe he can fish in his own county. So think about the implications beyond just our values, and the values around the river. So that's my first point. Second one is, Commissioner Hart, you raised an important question. You said, what are we going to learn from a biologist? Well, you're going to learn things like about 60% of the fish die in the Madison annually, because that's a natural cycle of trout, high mortality. And changing a regulation won't affect enough mortality to make that jump. That's the type of things you're going to learn. You'll learn about the difference in the effects of the regulation on adult spawning fish versus juvenile fish. And which age class section is is affecting the population now. There's so much. There is collective knowledge and also on the ground knowledge that you can be offered to understand the resource issue, that it really, I mean, you cut half the mortality of human cause mortality, you cut humans by half. I mean, there's all sorts of things that go into this that are very complicated. And I'm sorry, but common sense is pretty, is usually not a great way to assess biological processes. So just think about gathering the information and cogitating on it, thinking about it. So when your recommendations come before the commission, you've learned enough to make a good, solid recommendation. And I think I heard a lot of great thoughts and great ideas. You got the brain power for it, but you needed some information to power you into that creative mode. That's really, I think, if your commissioner to this area, really, that's what I want to hear, some really good dialogue and good, thoughtful recommendations that will make a difference in the fishery. And that's what having a biologist explain how this population has acted over the last 40 years is going to help. I think Matt captured it well. A good general policy statement is very valuable to guide us. A fishing regulation dialed in based on our values here is not as useful. So keep that in mind as you go ahead. But I appreciate all the work you guys are putting into it and all your thoughts and good conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Other comments? Yeah.
Chairman Walsh, thank you very much. Thank you all for the opportunity to comment and for serving. This is my third go around in a situation exactly like this in the last 10 years. So you're taking on a lot of the questions that have been the same challenges and the same questions that have been tackled or tried to be tackled before. I commend you on striking the rationalization from the recommendation tonight. I think that was a great high level move. I would just say, I would encourage you to approach this all from a very high level and realize that you don't have to solve all the world's problems right now, right here. I think the most important, the heart of the issue is the growth curve, hands down, and finding a way to cap that. The commercial side, the basic overall cap is the thing. The non-commercial side is much harder. But I do think that our knee jerk collectively is to want the data, more data, and for them to be sort of this connect the dots like solution set that's out there. And it's just not. It's not the data, it's what you do with it, how you interpret it. And there's a lot of subjectivity that goes into how this, this sort of process happens and what kind of suggestions you might come up with. I think there's a lot of danger of unintended consequences when you go too far down into micromanaging people in time and space. So I get really nervous when I hear a lot of that, like who can go where and when. I heard some sensitivity to the culture around Madison, around fly fishing and everything tonight. I fully support that. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that river's my whole life. So the culture around it is incredibly important to me. And I think it's important to everybody. I know everybody knows an angler that loves that place, and it's all very personal and it's very passionate. So the more you micromanage, the more you run the risk of killing that culture or really damaging it, which really harms angler experience, could harm our economy potentially. I don't know. So that's my main thing. Is I just hope you can tackle the big issue, the growth curve, flattening it or turning it down, flatten the curve, without getting too down in the weeds with some of the other stuff. And I think that's easier on the commercial side than the non-commercial side. The non-commercial side is definitely a more challenging problem, but in my experience, Brian knows as much about it as anybody in this room, and I think he's going to be a great resource to help you work through that. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks for being here.
I've got a few of my discounts. One, having served on a similar crew 1979, 40 years ago, the place we got is exactly what Brian described. Exactly. That you have to determine the capacity, figure out who the user groups, and then allocate the use. It's complicated, but that's what we came up with after 2 years. We recommended it to the governor. He had no appetite for regulating the public and told us drive home safely. And they're back at the same place again. We spent a lot of time on the same issue. That was the solution. It takes some work. You can do it. It can be done, and you can get the use regulated. But it's going to take some work. That's the decision that I think you have to come. Words matter. These discussions that occur, guides and outfitters are always cast as one group, but what we really are is we're just providing services to the paying public. So when you think about that, Brian and I are not out there fishing together as commercial people. I don't go fishing with Jason. We got paying clients who are members of the public. And for me, I've gone through, I'm gonna do it before the next meeting. I've gone through my outfitter records for the last decade. I've got a significant increase in resident people who are employing outfitters. So when you start doing stuff that's gonna restrict commercial users, you're restricting some public users who are Montana residents. You need to think about that. Right now, it's assumed that we're all guiding non-residents and dominating the river. And that's dangerous thinking, I'll tell you that. On the Idaho thing, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, we talked about the Idaho restrictions way back then. Ken, there are Montana outfitters working like up in the Selway that are working in Idaho, right? So that's an unintended consequence, I think, if you start dumping on Idaho outfitters. Plus, I'm pretty sure Andrew would back this up. The actual use of Idaho outfitters on Madison is insignificant. So, but you start doing that, and you're going to have retribution on the hunters who are hunting Selway get Montana. So I don't think that's a road we want to go down.
Thanks, Dave.
So my name's Dan Spedding. I am not a Montana resident. I'm also not from California. I'm from Massachusetts, and I've been coming here for 20 years. It's makes me feel great, the conversation in this room. I'm no expert. I'm not going to use any fancy terms or anything like that. But I've been going to the Madison for 20 years, and the reason I came to Montana in the first place is for the fish. I feel like I'm not a biologist. There's 2 rivers in Massachusetts. It's an abomination trout fishing there. But the best 2 rivers there are the ones that I catch wins, and that's a fact. I have been watching up close the rivers over the last 20 years. I fish like a complete maniac. I live in a van down by the river, and I feel like definitely the quality has fallen off in the past 20 years. I don't think there's any mistake about that. The health of the fish is definitely being affected. We do see the marks in the fish's mouths more now than ever. And I feel like it's kind of at an all-time low, and I'm afraid. The closures are good, but they're not enough. Everything, it feels like, continues to debilitate. When you start closing these things, the people spread out to the smaller rivers, and those days, they just can't hang. Places like Mill Creek and things like that. This is one of the worst years ever for those smaller rivers, and I think it had to do with the amount of closures. You've got a tough job. I appreciate the fact that there are people on the board that are actually like the people that are making the money off the rivers. You're not hammering it to death like the oil industry or the copper industry and trying to bilk every dollar out. It seems like you have a very responsible approach. But something really hit me this year, and that was that I was sad. I was sad about Montana, and that kind of broke my heart. And I didn't like the experience I had here fishing, and it's not just the Madison. I felt like I was at, I almost didn't know where to turn to go fishing next. There were so many people all over the place, and it makes me think maybe I got to go somewhere else, and that also makes me sad. It's a tough job. I hear the term "kick the can down the road." Don't kick the can down the road too far. Like, I think somebody needs to make some serious big decisions and try it out and just go for it. You know, not everyone's going to be happy. That's all I got to say. Thanks.
I think the numbers are going to determine our future, and the numbers are increasing so dramatically, so quickly, that we have to find out what the fishery can bear, figure out that number, then allocate it between all the users. And that's going to be very tough to do. It's not going to be easy at all.
Any comments from the online participants? Hearing none. Let's adjourn the meeting. Get out of here. Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, that's good for you.
Take it easy, buddy.
Take care of it. Yeah. That'd be the right.